Hey guys, Tyler here. Star Trek as a franchise consists of hundreds of hours of television, meaning hundreds of hours of world building and character development in this optimistic future setting. But in my view, some of the most foundational world building for the series occurs in the first 6 feature films featuring the cast of the original series. Released from 1979 to 1991, these 6 movies, the motion picture, The Wrath of Khan, The Search for Spock, The Voyage Home, The Final Frontier, and The Undiscovered Country, helped carry the franchise during a period when sci-fi was becoming much darker in tone. And indeed, the TOS movies do mostly dispense with the camp of their predecessor, the film's more realistic production designs and more militaristic tone, serving as something of a soft reboot of Star Trek. In this video, I invite you to join me on a deep dive of the TOS movies as I examine their contributions to the overall lore of the Star Trek universe. Let's get started. Before we dive in, a word from today's sponsor, Architects of Fate. Hey, are you looking to build an adventure with friends? Well, I just might have the place for you. Architects of Fate is a Twitch channel that specializes in tabletop RPGs with an emphasis on interactive gameplay and storytelling, all for free. Just by jumping into chat, you can make the lives of the game master and players easier or harder. It's up to you. Not only do Architects of Fate play well-known tabletop RPGs like 5th edition D&D, but they also play less common RPGs like Star Trek, Star Wars, Conan, Aliens, and more, plus totally original games like Solar Patrol, and Bad Horse's Evil League of Evil with the two-headed DM. Architects of Fate even has community game nights with chat. They're always looking for new games to share with each other and invite you to play alongside them. The goal of each stream is to make sure every viewer and player gets their chance to contribute and shine. Viewers of this channel should know that Mondays are Star Trek night on Architects of Fate. New crews and ships are being used all the time, giving everyone a chance to explore the deep and amazing universe of Star Trek. Several TNG-era stories are available on YouTube, and currently Bajor Rising explores the role of Starfleet in the pre-DS9 Bajor. And thanks to viewer requests, Architects now has a new adventure story called Back in Business, featuring Ferengi traders making their way in a post-Dominion War galaxy under the edicts of Nagus Rom.
Grand Nagus.
Started in early 2019 by Chief Architect Natu Shabby, Architects of Fate continues his family's tradition of tabletop gaming and late-night storytelling by sharing the experience with everyone. So come watch and join a group of players to write new stories and forge new friendships. Architects of Fate can be watched live on Twitch or rewatched on YouTube at the links on screen and in the description below. Big thanks to Architects of Fate for sponsoring this video. Now, back to the TOS movies. The earliest efforts to produce a Star Trek feature film date back to 1967, in between the production of the second and third seasons of the original series. This never got off the ground, nor did Roddenberry's submission of a script in 1973 called The Cattleman, based on a story outline called A Question of Cannibalism from his original 1964 proposal for TOS, and vaguely similar to The Devil in the Dark. The next closest Roddenberry came to making a Star Trek film was in 1975, when Paramount Pictures, who now owned the rights to the franchise after their purchase of Desilu, contracted him for a movie with a $3 million budget. The script for this project, called The God Thing, bears a strong resemblance to what eventually became Star Trek V: The Final Frontier, leading Roddenberry to accuse director William Shatner of stealing his idea, as Roddenberry had given Shatner a beat-for-beat rundown of The God Thing in May 1975. Once again, this project fell through as the studio was not satisfied with the script. After a year of further revisions to the story being bounced around, in July 1976, a completely new concept, Star Trek Planet of the Titans, began development. Written by Chris Bryant and Alan Scott, Planet of the Titans was set after the Enterprise's 5-year mission and involved Starfleet competing with the Klingons for a claim to the supposed homeworld of the mythical Titans, the Greek gods, not the football team. The planet was pulled into a black hole, and after Kirk takes the ship through the black hole, the crew introduces fire to primitive humans thousands of years ago, becoming the Titans themselves. I have to say, I'm really glad this did not get produced because it sounds way too Chariots of the Gods, if you know what I'm saying. A rewrite of the film by Philip Kaufman involved the Enterprise crew being lured into the past by a strange spider-like being that had taken telepathic control of humanity and was trying to remake man, physically deforming its victims and inspiring many images of strange humanoid creatures from Earth mythology. The spider turned out to be the last man on Earth, the result of faulty genetic experimentation. This rewrite, too, was rejected by Paramount in 1977, but by this point, the studio had been toying with hiring directors such as Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, and Francis Ford Coppola, indicating they were still interested overall in continuing Star Trek in some form. In my retrospective series about Star Trek The Next Generation, I talked about an earlier Star Trek project that went on to influence both TNG and the motion picture, Star Trek Phase 2. In 1977, 8 years after TOS went off the air, Paramount announced plans to launch a new television network to rival ABC, CBS, and NBC. Following the rapid explosion of Trek's popularity due to syndicated reruns, Paramount greenlit a sequel series to serve as the network's flagship program. The studio brought Roddenberry back to serve as writer and executive producer. The series would have featured a refitted Enterprise on a new 5-year mission. By the summer of 1977, a pilot was written and ready to be filmed that fall, and construction on sets had even begun. Ultimately, however, the series and new network deal itself fell through due to lack of advertiser interest. At first, it seemed like Phase 2 was completely dead, but due to the success of Star Wars, Paramount opted to revive the project as a full-fledged major theatrical release, which eventually became Star Trek the Motion Picture. Many elements of Phase 2, including the Enterprise refit and several new characters, were carried over. Both the plot and script for Star Trek the Motion Picture emerged from the unproduced Phase 2 pilot In Thy Image. Bruce Logan, scheduled to be DP on In Thy Image, served as DP for the Klingon scenes in the motion picture. After Paramount approved a screenplay draft by Harold Livingston, who adapted it from his original script for In Thy Image, pre-production on the motion picture officially began in December 1977. The uniforms, props, and studio models originally created for Phase 2 were upgraded to meet cinematic standards, and Andrew Probert, who later went on to design many elements of TNG, was brought in as a concept artist to replace his mentor, Ralph McQuarrie, who was busy working on The Empire Strikes Back. After Stephen Collins became the final lead actor to be cast, principal photography began in August 1978, and a second unit crew was sent to Yellowstone Park to shoot the planet Vulcan scene. By November, the budget had grown to $24 million, but writing of the film's third act was not completed until after Thanksgiving. Principal photography wrapped in January 1979, with only a few second unit scenes and the visual effects outstanding, the latter of which extended well into the fall of 1979. Future General Corporation was signed on to do the visual effects in March, but it was not until July, less than half a year before release, that work even began on the interior studio models of Beeger. Post-production wrapped 2 days before the US theatrical premiere in December 1979. One of the things that first stands out to me about the motion picture upon rewatch is the score. Jerry Goldsmith's iconic opening theme is widely recognized today for being the title sequence music for Star Trek The Next Generation and the end credits theme for the TNG movies. But as many fans will remember, its origins date back to 1979. The Klingon battle theme has also become iconic too, later showing up in The Final Frontier, First Contact, and various TNG episodes. The motion picture marks the first time that Klingonese is spoken on screen, being developed by James Doohan before being further fleshed out by linguist Mark Okrand for Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. It's also the first time we hear the Vulcan language spoken in a coherent manner, rather than a few loose spur-of-the-moment exclamations invented for the TOS episode Amok Time. The Vulcan characters on screen in the motion picture were actually shot and recorded speaking English, with new words pulling inspiration translation from Sanskrit and German, later developed and dubbed over by the actors in post-production. This scene in particular shows Spock about to undergo the Kulinar ritual to purge himself of all emotion, but Spock cannot bring himself to go through with it as he senses the presence of V'ger approaching Earth. Fun fact, this scene has also been scrutinized for its apparent contradiction of the statement that Vulcan has no moon. But as we later learn, the two celestial bodies in the sky are Vulcan's sister planet Takut and its moon, Tarukamai. The motion picture additionally serves as the first time that we see Earth in the 23rd century depicted on screen, besides the Telosian illusion of a park near Mojave in the cage. Kirk has been promoted to admiral, but he doesn't like pushing paper. He clearly wants to be a captain again. One of the other things that the motion picture is remembered for is its, shall we say, liberal pacing. The film is only 2 hours and 10 minutes long, but much of that runtime is spent showcasing the admittedly beautiful model and effects work in what has endearingly been termed starship porn. I will say that, to be honest, seeing the matte paintings of Earth and the model work of the refit Enterprise made me tear up during my rewatch, because, you know, I grew up watching these films, just like I grew up watching the TNG movies and the Kelvin Timeline movies. Anyway, the Enterprise is now under the command of Captain Will Decker, who production sources suggest is in fact the son of former commander of the USS Constellation, Commodore Matt Decker, as seen in the TOS episode The Doomsday Machine. The refit Enterprise features a main engineering deck and warp core that clearly went on to inspire the design of their counterparts in the TNG era shows. And much like how Will Riker and Deanna Troi are reunited under Picard's command in Encounter at Farpoint, Kirk, Decker, and crew are joined by Lieutenant Ilea, played by Indian model and actress Persis Kambata. A member of the Deltan race, known for their sexual prowess, she makes sure to note that her oath of celibacy is on record. The ever-present tension throughout the film between Captain Decker and Kirk, who usurps his authority, is certainly a compelling element of the plot. As Decker notes, Kirk hasn't logged a single star hour in 2.5 years, placing the film's date in approximately 2272 or 2273. But while the motion picture, epic in scope and scale, definitely is a cerebral event film and a technical masterpiece with beautiful visuals, like I said, it does kind of drag in some sections. Of course, V'ger as a phenomenon is fascinating from start to finish, with the big reveal of it being an augmented version of the Voyager 6 probe a fun sci-fi twist. Decker also confirms that the probe launched more than 300 years ago from their point of view, distinctly putting the TOS era in the late 23rd century. The identity of the machine race that augmented V'ger has been the subject of intense fan speculation for years and years, with many drawing a connection to the Borg. Spock even says resistance would be futile in the movie. That said, as I've explained before, I find this theory to be rather lacking. You can hear more about my thoughts on the matter in a video I made a couple years ago about this very topic, link in the description. In 1980, after the box office success of the motion picture, Paramount began planning a TV movie sequel. Gene Roddenberry submitted a script about the Enterprise crew having to make sure the Klingons did not stop the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Interestingly enough, the Strange New Worlds episode, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, suggests the Romulans might have been involved with the assassination along with other major historical events like Chernobyl, suggesting that in the Trek timeline, JFK's death actually slowed down human progress rather than the other way around. In any event, this script was rejected, and he was taken off the project and relegated to the position of executive consultant. Ouch, that's definitely a title you make up to try and appease someone. The project was subsequently upgraded to a full-fledged theatrical feature, as it should be, and in November of that year, Paramount Television executive producer Harve Bennett submitted a one-page outline titled Star Trek: War of the Generations. He watched every episode of TOS in preparation for his task, and was struck by Ricardo Montalban's performance as Khan Noonien Singh in Space Seed. In addition to Khan, the themes of aging and death, as well as elements like Kirk's estranged lover and their son, were present as early as this draft. In it, Kirk is called to investigate a rebellion on a Federation world, and Kirk's son is one of the leaders of the rebellion. But we ultimately find out that Khan is the true mastermind behind it. In December, Jacoby Swords submitted a 19-page treatment based on Bennett's outline, followed by a first draft script in February 1981. In this version of the script, Spock's death occurred just a little over a third of the way into the story. This is what hooked Leonard Nimoy to sign on to the project, as the opportunity to play Spock's death was too good for him to pass up. This draft was, by definition, even closer to the final version of the film and opened with Captain Terrell and his first officer, Pavel Chekhov, beaming down to Ceti Alpha 5, selected as a testing site of a new Federation weapon. Apparently, in this draft, during his isolation on Ceti Alpha 5, Khan had developed impressive telekinetic powers because reasons. By the time of the second draft in April, the title had now been changed to Star Trek: The Genesis Project. Now we're getting somewhere. The so-called Omega weapon from the previous draft was now changed to a terraforming device that, if it fell into the wrong hands, could be used as a devastating weapon. The new draft also introduced the character of Saavik in the Kobayashi Maru simulation. A storyboarding process for special effects began, this time to be produced by Industrial Light and Magic, which would of course go on to dominate the industry in the coming decades. This was followed by another outline by Theodore Sturgeon in July, and a 155-page script titled The New Star Trek by Samuel A. Peoples in August, that completely did away with Khan, but this script was considered unfilmable. It was finally by September when the eventual writer and director of Star Trek II, Nicholas Meyer, became involved with the project, submitting a draft called Star Trek: The New Frontier. This draft emerged from a meeting between Meyer, Bennett, and producer Robert Sallin at Meyer's house, in which they took all the elements of the previous drafts that they liked and incorporated them into a new script. It was then followed by a second draft titled Star Trek: The Undiscovered Country, which would later go on to, of course, be the name of the sixth Star Trek film. The film's title would be changed by Paramount mid-production to The Vengeance of Khan, which Meyer hated, then to The Wrath of Khan, which Meyer hated even more, but was made to live with. Meyer was not directly involved in the casting of Montalban, but he did personally recruit Bibi Besh to play Dr. Carol Marcus, Merritt Butrick to play Dr. David Marcus, Paul Winfield, who later went on to play the Tamarian Dathan in the TNG episode Darmok as Captain Terrell, and a young Kirstie Alley as Saavik. After a third draft of the script was delivered, 12-week principal photography began in November 1981, lasting until late January 1982. Only cosmetic changes were made to the bridge set from the motion picture in the form of a darker repaint, and the set also doubled as the Reliant Bridge. The Enterprise's torpedo bay was, interestingly, a redress of the Klingon bridge from the motion picture. But one of the most significant changes is that the Starfleet uniforms were updated to the recognizable Navy-inspired red jacket design used in all the subsequent TOS movies. James Horner was also brought in to do the score, which he would also provide for Star Trek III, although Star Trek IV would have a different composer. Released in June 1984, The Wrath of Khan is considered by many fans to be the best Star Trek film, and many non-fans even consider it to be an excellent sci-fi movie. And while I do consider one of the other films in the series to be my favorite, which I'll get into in a bit, The Wrath of Khan truly is a masterpiece. The dialogue is very Shakespearean, but still accessible to a modern movie-going audience, and the vision of the future that Meyer brought to Gene Roddenberry's universe, while controversial, is, I think, pretty appropriate. The motion picture is Gene's vision to a T, in the sense that you have this powerful spaceborne threat in V'Ger that, while dangerous, is ultimately revealed to possess a curious mind searching for answers to questions about the universe, much like its creators. It borders on a trippy kind of sci-fi energy that other epic science fiction films like 2001: A Space Odyssey and David Lynch's Dune capture as well. But like I said, the motion picture's cerebral qualities set it apart from what a lot of audiences are comfortable with. The Wrath of Khan's combination of smart writing with more exciting pacing helps propel it beyond its predecessor. Of course, this tonal departure is not without its critics. Again, Starfleet is presented as being more militarized in not just The Wrath of Khan, but the subsequent movies. David Marcus fully equates Starfleet with the military in his complaint that scientists have always been pawns of the military. This is somewhat contradicted by Kirk's statement in the Voyage Home that he's not in the military, though in that context, he's mainly referring to the US military. But either way, even though Starfleet is depicted as being more militarized in the TOS movies, it's still portrayed as what an ideal military looks like. Starfleet officers may be soldiers in not so many words, but they're also scientists, and Starfleet's primary focus is and always has been exploration. That they're called upon to defend the Federation could frankly be seen as strengthening the organization's integrity. There are still merits, of course, to these critiques, particularly in the aftermath of the Dominion War as referenced by Beckett Mariner in Lower Decks. But the TOS movies do a great job of making this world feel more lived in, and David's attitude towards Starfleet is still reflective of a society that, while imperfect, has provided a standard of living to the average citizen that we could only dream of today. Indeed, Carol counters David's remarks by saying that Starfleet has kept the peace for 100 years. This apparently does not take into account the various wars that the Federation fought with the Klingon Empire in the mid-23rd century, but it does evidently point to how Starfleet helped secure Earth's freedom in the wake of the Romulan War. The Wrath of Khan does take some other liberties with continuity, of course. For one, Khan famously says to Chekhov,
"I never forget a face."
Even though Chekhov was not in Space Seed, although this encounter could have happened off-screen. Regardless, this dramatic reunion works, and Montalban's portrayal of Khan, hell-bent on revenge, is legendary. We learn that Khan's wife, Marla MacGyvers, died after the Botany Bay survivors were marooned on Ceti Alpha 5. The planet suffered a harsh climatic shift after its orbit was disrupted by a black hole, which destroyed Ceti Alpha 6. We also get confirmation that the Botany Bay originally launched in the year 1996, a date which has at this point probably been retconned by the temporal Cold War as suggested in Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. The Wrath of Khan introduces Kirk's creative solution to the no-win scenario of the Kobayashi Maru test, which was to reprogram the simulation so it was possible to rescue the crew. We see Kirk's implementation of this solution play out on screen in the alternate universe of the 2009 Star Trek film. And The Wrath of Khan is also the first film that introduces the phrase, "The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few," which will be repeated in dialogue in subsequent Star Trek films. This is most poignantly demonstrated with Spock's sacrifice at the end of the film to save the ship after the warp core has gone offline. But as we see, Spock's death is only the beginning of something new. Within days after the release of The Wrath of Khan, Paramount ordered Bennett to start writing Star Trek III. The film, ending with Spock being alive again, was in there from the start, and Bennett worked backwards from that conclusion to complete the script. The original draft, titled Return to Genesis, would have featured the Romulans arriving at Genesis instead of the Klingons and finding the world to be very rich in dilithium. The Romulans would have begun mining the planet, only for the miners to be killed by a feral Spock, whose aging was still tied to the planet in this draft. Upon hearing of the Genesis device, Vulcan would have threatened to secede from the Federation, bringing Kirk and the Enterprise crew to Vulcan to address this diplomatic crisis. After a copy of this story was leaked to fans in February 1983, Bennett was forced to rewrite the script, although it was actually director Leonard Nimoy who had the villains changed from the Romulans to the Klingons. The search for Spock is the first time we see the Earth space dock and Klingon bird of prey models, which have been reused in several Star Trek productions, including The Next Generation. We're also introduced to the Excelsior class, whose prototype carries a so-called transwarp drive. As I explained in my video about transwarp, this faster-than-light propulsion method likely takes the form of faster-than-normal warp travel and is deemed the Great Experiment. I also somewhat confusingly say that the drive is scrapped after the failed test depicted in the film, which is actually sabotage by Scotty, but has been speculated that this transwarp drive is what became regular warp in the 24th century, leading to a recalibration of the warp scale. Throughout the film, Dr. McCoy carries Spock's Katra, essentially his life essence, in his brain, transferred by Spock via mind meld in one of the final scenes of The Wrath of Khan. DeForest Kelley delivers a fantastic performance that captures both the disturbing and humorous qualities of a man essentially carrying two souls in his head and switching between Spock's manner of speech and his own. He even attempts a nerve pinch on a Lando Calrissian-looking motherfucker, but to no avail. Saavik in this film is played by Robin Curtis, as the salary for Kirstie Alley her agent demanded was higher than DeForest Kelley's, which was considered a non-starter by Paramount. Curtis's performance is definitely distinct from Alley's, whereas Alley's Saavik had more of an emotional tinge to her, partly based on the fact that she was intended to be half Romulan. Curtis plays more of a typical Vulcan in this film, but I like both. Christopher Lloyd also plays Klingon Commander Krug, and Mark Leonard returns as Spock's father Sarek. The search for Spock has one of the most consequential third acts in the franchise, arguably, including not only David's death, which solidified Kirk's racist attitude towards the Klingons, but the destruction of the Enterprise, a ship these men and women have been serving on for decades. The search for Spock is definitely not as strong as The Wrath of Khan, and it does have quite a bit of middle-of-the-story energy to it, but I think it's better paced than the motion picture, and it's still an enjoyable film. And the ending containing Spock's reintegration with his Katra is very emotional. Nimoy fought hard with the studio to end the film on Vulcan, because he knew what it would mean to Star Trek fans.
Jim. Your name is Jim.
Yes.
Release of the fourth Star Trek film, originally titled The Adventure Continues, was originally scheduled for summer 1986, but was delayed to allow William Shatner time to wrap shooting a season of T.J. Hooker before he could join the project. An early draft of the script featured a scene of Sulu meeting his great-great-great-grandfather in San Francisco, pitched by Bennett to George Takei. The child hired to play the character, named Akira Sulu, was not a professional actor, however, and the filmmakers could not get a performance out of him, leading it to be scrapped. The encounter survives in Vonda McIntyre's novelization of the film. Early drafts also had Saavik remaining on Vulcan as she was pregnant with Spock's child, implying the two had sex when Spock was undergoing Pon farr on the Genesis planet. And the character of Dr. Taylor was originally a male character, a wacky college professor and UFO nut, to be played by Eddie Murphy. Murphy was a Star Trek fan, but chose instead to appear in another film, and the role was rewritten to be a love interest for Kirk. Catherine Hicks won the role. The second Star Trek production to be directed by Leonard Nimoy, The Voyage Home of course follows the Enterprise crew aboard their stolen Klingon bird of prey as they travel back in time to retrieve two members of the extinct humpback whale species, in hopes of having them communicate with a probe that is devastating Earth's climate. Nicholas Meyer was brought in to rewrite large sections of the 20th century scenes, and the result is without a doubt the funniest Star Trek film to date, and overall my favorite. I forgot how many times this movie made me laugh.
If we play our cards right, we may be able to find out when those whales are leaving.
How will playing cards help?
The Voyage Home is an early installment of Trek that, of course, promotes the idea that there are other forms of native intelligent life on Earth besides humans, namely cetaceans. That the humpbacks have been extinct since the 21st century in Trek's timeline was indeed a commentary on the contemporary problem of whaling and overfishing. The film also notably marks the first time that the slingshot effect method of time travel is used since the TOS episode Assignment Earth. And interestingly, The Voyage Home is, well, home to a number of firsts in Star Trek, continuity-wise. It's the first Star Trek film not to feature a Starship Enterprise as the primary setting of the story. It's the first time we see an Afrosian in Star Trek, a member of the USS Saratoga crew and the species of the Federation President in the Undiscovered Country. It's the first time we see a Cation in live action after Maresa's appearance in the animated series. It establishes that Kirk is from Iowa and that Sulu was born in San Francisco. To my knowledge, it's the first major instance of product placement in the franchise in the form of Michelob beer, the Macintosh Plus, and Pacific Bell. And also to my knowledge, it's the earliest Star Trek production that distinctly claims Earth no longer uses money in the 23rd century, despite some evidently colloquial references to pay in the original series. Although Voyager establishes a New World economy emerged by the 22nd century that Strange New Worlds distinctly classifies as socialism. The Voyage Home also contains a number of fun time paradoxes. In order to obtain some money, Kirk sells the pair of antique glasses McCoy gave him for his birthday in The Wrath of Khan, noting that they will eventually become his present again. Famously, Scotty uses the Macintosh Plus to show Dr. Nichols of Plexicorp the formula for transparent aluminum. Nichols is later credited as the inventor of this material, which is widely used in starship construction in later centuries. And Grandma even gets a new kidney. Towards the end of the film, the crew is pardoned for their actions in the search for Spock, with the exception of Kirk being demoted from admiral to captain, and is given command of the USS Enterprise NCC 1701A. Okay folks, let's get this one over with. We all kind of agree that Star Trek V is fucking awful. Director William Shatner first came up with the idea for The Final Frontier after watching a televangelist couple and being disgusted that they were purporting to be the harbingers of God and had become rich through donations from their followers. The film's pre-production and shooting schedules were severely trimmed due to the 1988 Writers Guild of America strike, and many shots were set up in mere minutes rather than hours. I'm just gonna tell you guys right now from experience that setting up a shot in minutes is what you do when you are A, working with a sunset, or B, in film school, not on a professional set. Herman Zimmerman was brought in as production designer and created a new set for the Enterprise A. Industrial Light and Magic was not contracted to do the effects for the movie as they were unavailable, so a lesser-known firm was hired, resulting in poor effects quality and some clearly unfinished shots. The film features Spock's never-before-mentioned brother Sybok, who is called to a place called Shakari by an alien entity claiming to be God. He lures the Enterprise crew to the planet Nimbus 3, jointly established as the planet of galactic peace by the Federation, Klingon Empire, and Romulan Star Empire 20 years earlier. The ship somehow travels to the center of the galaxy, something that would take decades even in the late 24th century, and surprise, it's not God. The film was considered so bad that Roddenberry deemed it apocryphal, although by this point he really had no real authority to do so. Larry Luckenbill does give everything he's got to this performance as Sybok, and this film also features the return of Jerry Goldsmith as composer for the first time since the motion picture. But between the rocket boots, the bad effects, and everything else, this film nearly killed the Star Trek franchise. It truly is borderline unwatchable, although maybe not as unwatchable as Star Trek Insurrection or Star Trek Nemesis. That's right, I am still going to die on that hill. Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country was almost never made, given the disastrous outcome of the previous film. But no one wanted to end the TOS cast on that low of a note, so a sixth film was commissioned with the stipulation that it not exceed the budget of $5 by even $1. Bennett proposed a Starfleet Academy prequel, which was actually greenlit by the studio and was in pre-production for 18 months before it was scrapped. Titled The First Adventure, it featured some superficial similarities to what eventually became the 2009 Star Trek reboot film, but the two projects' plot lines were substantially different. Upon being accepted into Starfleet Academy, Kirk meets Bones, Scotty, an alien cadet named Calabar, and a love interest named Cassandra Hightower. So it sounds like a romance novel. The script depicts a version of Star Trek's future in which slavery still drives the economies of various Federation worlds, and racism is still so strong that Spock experiences a beating at the hands of Calabar and his cronies. Kirk, Spock, Scotty, and McCoy would have stolen a starship to fight Calabar, who attacks Starfleet over being expelled. This script was vociferously denounced by the likes of Gene Roddenberry and members of the TOS cast, such as Walter Koenig. The studio turned to Nimoy for ideas, and in a meeting, Nimoy suggested a story involving the Federation and Klingon Empire as an allegory for the real-world decline of the Soviet Union. Nicholas Meyer was brought back to direct. A prologue originally planned for the film would have established that prior to being called back into service, Kirk was in a revitalized relationship with Carol Marcus, McCoy had become a public nuisance by showing up drunk to events, Spock was engaged in classified activities, Uhura was a radio show host, Scotty was a professor, Chekhov was a chess grandmaster, and Sulu was a taxi driver on a backwater alien colony. I'm not really sure how that would have squared with him being the captain of the Excelsior, but it's not canon, so whatever. The prologue would have also featured the HMS Bounty being disassembled in space dock. Last-minute budgetary limitations forced the filmmakers to cut this sequence. The film opens with the destruction of Praxis, a Klingon moon, in a clear parallel to the Chernobyl disaster. We see that Sulu, instead of being a taxi driver, is the captain of the USS Excelsior. So yeah, that's what I just got through saying. Members of the old Enterprise crew are called to a meeting at Starfleet Command Headquarters. Present is Admiral Cartwright, played by Brock Peters, who was also present in the Voyage Home and went on to play Benjamin Sisko's dad Joseph in Deep Space Nine. After 70 years of unremitting hostility between the Federation and Klingon Empire, the Federation is to assist with an evacuation of Kronos and to take charge of a massive environmental cleanup project. The exact details of this evacuation are never revealed in canon, but we see Kronos is still inhabited by the late 24th century. The Enterprise crew is to rendezvous with the Klingon flagship, Kronos 1, and is tasked with hosting a diplomatic dinner with members of the Klingon High Council ahead of a peace conference. Kirk is livid that Spock would suggest Starfleet assign Kirk to such a mission given that, you know, Klingon bastards killed his son. We're introduced to Lieutenant Valeris, played by Kim Cattrall. Christopher Plummer famously plays the Shakespeare-quoting Klingon General Chang, and David Warner, who went on to play Jean-Luc Picard's Cardassian interrogator in Chain of Command, plays Chancellor Gorkon, a clear nod to Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev. The dinner is riddled with faux pas. Faux pas? It's faux pas, right? I have the bachelor's degree. Such as Chekhov saying the Federation believes everyone is entitled to inalienable human rights, prompting Gorkon's daughter Ozitber to charge Chekhov with racism and decry the Federation as a
Homo sapiens only club.
Chang also says that the Empire needs breathing room, which Kirk notes is a quote from Adolf Hitler. Later, an unauthorized torpedo seemingly launched from the Enterprise seriously damages Kronos 1. After being accused of murdering Gorkon, an act that is really the result of a conspiracy involving Valeris and other disgruntled Starfleet officers, Kirk and McCoy are arrested. Their legal counsel at the trial is a man named Worf, played by Michael Dorn and suggested by publicity materials to be the other Worf's grandfather. Kirk and McCoy are found guilty of the crime by virtue of Kirk being responsible for what happens under his own command, and the two are sentenced to die on the Klingon penal asteroid Rurapente. They meet Martia, a member of the shape-shifting cameloid species. We find out that she has been promised a full pardon if she assists the Klingons in assassinating Kirk and McCoy by pretending to help them escape. Spock and the crew, still in control of the Enterprise, use facts and logic to determine that the Enterprise could not have possibly launched the torpedo. Spock remarks that an ancestor of his once said that,
If you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Suggesting Amanda Grayson may be a descendant of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into that. They find out where Kirk and McCoy are being held and travel to Rurapente to rescue the two officers. They arrive at the Khitomer Conference just in time to stop the assassination of the Federation president, and the conference proceeds as planned, solidifying a peace agreement between the Federation and Klingon Empire. It is after this that the Enterprise A is called in for decommissioning after approximately 8 years of service. Star Trek VI fills in the gaps of some background lore of the Star Trek universe that had begun to be filled in by the Next Generation. Specifically, the concept of a full-fledged alliance between the Federation and Klingon Empire was an optimistic projection of the two great powers' relationship during the 23rd century that was marked by periods of cold and hot war. And indeed, the end of history message that Star Trek VI carries makes it one of the stronger films in the series overall. Meyer's directorial skills and the film's Shakespearean dialogue are carried over from The Wrath of Khan, and the uncovering of the conspiracy makes for a thrilling ride. Originally, it was to be Savick who was the traitor, but Roddenberry rejected this as he felt Savick was too popular a character with fans to take her character in this direction. Of course, Roddenberry had no authority to make this decision, and Meyer was kind of tired of Roddenberry continuing to intrude on the creative process. Meyer wanted Kirstie Alley to reprise her role as Saavik, but as she was at the height of her popularity with Cheers, her salary would have been too cost prohibitive. It was then decided to change the character, which is how Kim Cattrall landed the role. Meyer also wanted James Horner to provide the score again, but Horner felt his career had moved beyond Star Trek. Overall, Roddenberry, who disavowed large swaths of the post-motion picture Star Trek films after being demoted to executive consultant, was displeased with many of the military aspects of the Undiscovered Country. In fact, he even summoned a meeting with Meyer that included heavy legal representation that turned into a shouting match between the two men. Meyer later regretted his behavior, especially since at the time Roddenberry was very ill. Roddenberry died in December 1991, mere days after seeing the film. I've thought a lot about this, and even though I always say that Deep Space Nine is my favorite Star Trek show, I think that the TOS movies are my favorite incarnation of Star Trek. Like I said, even though Starfleet is more militarized in these films, particularly from The Wrath of Khan onward, it's sort of an idealized version of the military. And the setting of these films is still presented as a post-scarcity, quasi-utopian society. Even though humans still face outward threats and have personal inward struggles like coming to terms with aging and death, I would have no problem living in this era of the future. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the TOS movies serve as something of a soft reboot of the franchise, sort of grounding it in a way that I think makes these films hold up the best out of any pre-90s Star Trek productions. So what's your favorite TOS movie, and what parts of my analysis do you agree or disagree with? Let me know down below. And before I go, guess I might as well rank these, right? At the bottom, I'd put The Final Frontier without any hesitation. It really is that bad. At number 5, I'd probably have to go with the motion picture, simply because even though it's very beautiful, I'm gonna pull a Gen Z and say it's too slow for me. In 4th, I'd put The Search for Spock, which, as I stated, is not as strong as the top 3, but is still quite enjoyable. In 3rd, I'd put The Undiscovered Country, The Wrath of Khan in 2nd, and The Voyage Home in 1st, as I said, it's my favorite. There you go. With that, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up down below and don't forget to share it. That stuff really helps me out. If you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to do that as well so you won't miss future uploads, and click the bell icon to receive all notifications. If you want to support my work even further, you can become a patron at patreon.com/OrangeRiver, link in the description, or become a YouTube member by clicking the join button on my channel page. I just want to give a quick shout out to all of my donors who allow me to bring on outside talent like editors to make more high quality content for you to enjoy. By becoming a patron or member, you also get access to awesome perks like behind the scenes photos and videos, patron and member only polls, name in the credits, merch discounts, and more. Or you can drop a one-time super thanks or PayPal donation. All are appreciated. Links to my PayPal as well as my social media and merch store are in the description too. That's all I have for this week. Live long and prosper.